Hello, everyone. It is Jaime Jo Wright here, and today I have the enigmatic, amazing, awesome writer, Amanda Cox, with us. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
I'm super excited to chat with you. You are a multi-Christie Award-winning author, and I remember being there when you won some of them, and it's always a surprise when you win, and it's exciting. So, congratulations on that. If I haven't
Thank
actually
you.
said it face to face.
Thank you. Thank you. It was definitely exciting and unexpected and all of those things.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
But well deserved. Well deserved.
you.
And I know I'm gonna mess up the title of one of the novels with the Country Depot. What's that title again?
The longest title ever, The Secret Keepers of Old Depot
Yes.
Grocery.
I think I have called that book like everything under the sun, and I just started to call it the Old Depot book.
That's what I call it
Yeah, the Old
usually.
Depot book. But that is such a great story. I had a friend of mine who she's from my church and she read the book. She's like, "Have you read the Old Depot book?" I'm like, "It's on my to be read." She goes, "Move it to the top." So I did, but then I never got to it. And so I just turned the audiobook on. And every night before bed, I listen to an audiobook and it puts me to sleep. You had me up so late, so many nights.
I
Because I
would say
like,
sorry about that, but I guess
yeah,
that's a good thing.
that's a good thing. It's called a success story if you're the author, because yeah, I lost sleep over your book, and it's not like scary or suspenseful or anything like that. It's just one of those books where you just have to know what's going to happen next with the characters. So that's a plug for the Secret Keepers of the Old Country Depot.
Close, close.
Oh, I was not quite.
The Secret Keepers of Old Depot Grocery.
Oh, see, I was close.
You were close.
Why do I call
You
it
were getting
Country
me.
Depot?
Well, it's in the country, so
What's with the depot? Now I'm. Oh, we have a Country Depot. That's probably why.
there you
We
go.
have one outside of town that when I was a kid, we used to go pick up all the supplies for our goats. We had goats and rabbits. We went to the depot. I bet
Oh,
you that's
nice.
why. Okay. Anyway, you're like, okay, Jamie, stop talking now. Yes, like crazy. But you have a new book that is
Yes.
just hitting shelves, which is also a really cool title. And it's He Should Have Told the Bees. So right there, I have so many questions, but why don't you tell us a little bit about this story?
Okay, so it's a story that is about two women who lives are kind of together in an unexpected way when they are both named on one man's trust for a farm. And one woman knows exactly why she was named in the trust. It's his faithful daughter who has kept bees alongside him her entire life, was raised just him and her. So she knows this is an expected thing, but she's pretty surprised when she finds a stranger is named.
Mm,
Callie Peterson is equally confused because this man is a stranger to her, and she's had a pretty unstable upbringing. Her mother struggles with alcoholism, and so in a lot of ways, she's been that caregiver role for her mom. And so she's always been striving to have stability in her life. Like that's just
hmm
been her goal that she's really, really wanted. But every time she's almost there to this new place that she wants to be, her mom kind of has a way of like finding her way back into her life. And so again, she's struggling because she really loves her mom, really wants to help her, wants good things for her, but also is trying to figure out those boundaries of like where do I help mom and where do I kind of try to have a life.
Right.
And so when she's named on the trust, she thinks, well, what if this was my opportunity to help my mom with her rehab that she's trying to get into and be able to start my store that I've been trying to get up and going. But then she meets Beckett, the beekeeper, and she starts to question how much right do I have to rob somebody else of their stability
Mm.
to get my own? And so it kind of throws them together. And so these two women are kind of um, figuring out why their
Yeah.
lives have been thrown together, and learning a lot about themselves and a lot of healing and hope found along the way.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really fascinating. Because, yeah, that would be really irritating as a daughter to suddenly find out that there's this stranger that's coming in really into everything you hold dear and precious and saying, hey, I lay claim to 50% of it.
And her father was always this really strong source of like security for her, always made her feel safe. There were a lot of things in her life that she struggled to feel safe in life, but her dad was like the source of safety and stability and security. And so it's at
Mhm.
the point of his unexpected death that he's kind of left her vulnerable. And so she's really struggling with like the grieving process, of
Yeah,
course, as well as trying to like, okay, dad, like what is up with these decisions that you've made
right.
that have left everything we've built together a vulnerable, like
Mm,
left it vulnerable.
yeah. And I suppose she asks us the questions too of, was everything that we even had as a relationship real, authentic, true, and all those other questions, which is not something you want to grapple with while you're grieving.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So bees, we have bees in the story,
Yes.
lots of bees. And I have questions about that, but how do the bees fit in with the title? Like he should have told the bees, like, are the bees like a symbolic of the father, or how does that work into the story?
Okay, so I really love bees. I
Okay.
keep bees as a hobby. And as I learned about bees before I kept bees, one thing that I really loved is that bees are this female red run society.
Right.
And so it was, it's a women's fiction book. And so having those worker bees and the queen bee are all women. And so it was really fun to kind of weave in some symbolism between the drama that is going on
I
between these
like
two
that.
women and kind of like
Yeah.
the drama that happens inside a beehive.
Hmm.
Because it's fascinating. The social structure that happens in a hive is just wild. So that was a lot of fun. The title comes from this old tradition that if anything of importance happens in a household, you are supposed to tell the bees. So particularly if the beekeeper dies, you were supposed to go and inform the bees. And so that's kind of where the title
Interesting.
came from. And so when it says he should have told the bees, the opening chapter has Beckett out in the hives telling the bees of her father's passing. And
Mm,
so then she realized, as she's starting to discover things that are going on, she's like, Dad, you always asked me. She didn't really necessarily believe in his superstitions about the bees.
right.
But it was something he asked for. He's like, he always said, like, if something ever happens to me, please go and tell the bees. You wanted me to tell the bees this. Why have you left all of these things that
Oh,
you have
yeah.
not told?
Yeah.
And so
Oh, interesting.
that's kind of how that goes
Where did
together.
that tradition ever come from? I've never heard of that.
It started, I believe it's an old English tradition. So when Queen Elizabeth passed away, they actually had the royal beekeeper. They have a royal beekeeper and went out and like informed the bees that she passed. And they've
Really?
done some articles about that. So it's this really old, there's so many cool um like folklore and legends about bees
Yeah.
that like if you don't tell the bees that the bees could die or the bees will leave or things
Yeah.
like that.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Now, my dad had a couple beehives. So I have a very tiny, minuscule relationship with bees. But the funny story is my mom and dad moved from their country home, so the bees had to go bye bye, and they moved into town into this subdivision where everything's, everybody cuts their grass at the same time and keeps everything perfect at the same time. And my mom would drive her neighbors crazy because she would not mow the lawn when the dandelions were in full bloom. And they would be like, "You need to mow your lawn. This is ugly." And she's like, "But the bees need the flowers."
It's so true though.
I
There,
know.
especially like in that early spring when the clover's blooming in your yard and the
Yes,
dandelions, like it really is very helpful to them.
it is.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure her neighborhood was not
They
pleased.
weren't really pleased with dandelion harvesting, but you know, I also learned as a kid in the country that you don't run barefoot across the yard when the dandelions
Right.
are in full bloom because you will get stung on the bottom of your foot.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Yes, my children, because especially because I have beehives in my backyard.
Oh yeah.
I don't have a ton of dandelions, but I have a ton of clover, and
Okay.
they refuse to learn. They won't learn that lesson.
Yeah.
They're like,
No.
Mom, I just got stung by a bee. I'm like, were you barefoot in the yard again? You're like, yeah.
Yeah, it happens.
Okay.
I love it. Okay. So when you look at this story and you look at the lives of these two women, obviously we won't go into the spoilers of why their lives are intertwined and all of that, because I'm sure that's the majority of the book. But what are some of the deeper themes that you felt were important to bring out in their lives that can, um, yes, entertain us as readers, but also make us think as readers, and things that we can internalize ourselves?
So, some themes that were really important for me was the idea of mental health and the
Mm,
way that therapy and faith can blend together in a very beautiful way.
mm,
Sometimes people can be on one side or the other of those two
right.
things. And so, I really wanted to take some time and dig into how those things can go together beautifully into the character's overall growth and development. Um, I also really, particularly with Callie, she's a character who, in the story, she has strong faith, but at the same time struggles with trust
Hmm.
and trusting God because as a child, she always had to trust herself. Like that was the
Mm,
only person she could rely on. And so taking some time and just thinking through with the character, sharing with readers the ways that our early childhood experiences can impact the way that we see God and how we relate with God.
yeah.
And so Callie has some frustrations with herself because sometimes she's like, I know I should trust God in this situation, but like I'm also holding on to this with both hands and learning how to trust and have grace for herself in that process
Mm,
of trusting God because sometimes as Christians, we don't have grace for ourselves when we're kind of
right.
in the process. We see where we should be and we're like, this is where I should be. And when we're not there, we can get very, down on ourselves
Hmm.
and paralyze ourselves in some ways because we feel shame about where we are instead
Right.
of recognize that God has grace and understanding for where we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. I think that plays a lot into the mental health concept too, because there is kind of that lifelong battle within the faith world of you have to have faith, and your mental health might be because of a lack of faith, or et cetera, et cetera. And so then even I think within the Christian world, so to speak, going to therapy is sometimes considered a sign of lack of faith, or
Mhm.
something like that. And we need to have that grace with each other and ourselves, like you were saying. And I think it's hard to have grace for oneself.
Yeah.
Why
I at
is
least
that?
struggle with that pretty, more than others. I think, yeah, I tend to be pretty hard on myself.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's personality type too, though. Because I was just actually talking to my daughter this morning, and she was talking about how she messed up this or she messed up that, and she doesn't want to do this anymore because she always messes it up. And I'm like, but do you enjoy doing it? And she's like, well, I love doing it. I just mess it up, so I'm not going to do it anymore. And I'm kind of like, but why would you cheat yourself out of something you love? And she goes, but why would I do something I love and watch myself mess up? And I was like, wow, I don't even know how to respond to that, you know?
It's can be tough and it
Yeah,
can be frustrating and it makes me think of that scripture where Paul talks about like that, I see the things that I want to do and that back and
yeah.
forth and like that wrestling of like, okay, like I want to do this thing, but I mess up at this thing and
Right, right. So, what are ways that you explored the concept of having grace for yourself? Like, did you, as you wrote the story, did you uncover, even tiny little epiphanies of, wow, I can apply grace in this area, or here's something that I learned?
one way that I kind of approach it is so you have these two women and they both have had some traumatic experiences in their past. And you could try to look at one or the other and say which one of them, had it worse. In a lot of ways, you know, Beckett has had this idyllic life on this farm, and
Hmm.
then Callie has had no structure, no stability. And so you could kind of look and be like, oh, she had it worse. But the thing is in a lot of ways it pushes her to deeper faith and it
Hmm.
pushes her to getting help with the things that she struggled with.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so one way that I approach it is, Beckett hasn't had that journey yet. And so when they're meeting each other, and they're starting to get to their relationship unfolds a little bit, Beckett kind of says, well, how did you get to the point that you're at now?
Hmm.
Because she
Yeah.
kind of sees Callie as down the road a little bit further.
Okay.
And it was, she has a conversation with her about, you know, you're seeing one version of the picture, but there is grace that is there. And in that space of grace, like that's really where God can do some really cool work with our broken pieces, is
Mm,
if we enter into that grace that he has and see that it's there and be embraced by that.
yeah.
Um, and then the growth can happen in that place. Um, But I think it's, for like I said, I can be pretty hard on myself. And so it's an ongoing learning experience for
Right?
me. And so like getting to work with these characters as their story progress are kind of, good reminders for me.
Yeah, yeah.
That this is also true for me because sometimes we know things that are true, but sometimes really fully embracing those truths for ourselves in the day to day and walking in those truths can be a
Yes.
different layer, a different
Yes.
layer.
And do you find when you write those types of themes into your books and your stories that two things happen? One, God starts to put things in your life that make you personally have to deal with those things. And then two, you actually start holding yourself accountable to address those things because you're writing it for other people to do it. So it seems kind of
Right.
hypocritical if you don't yourself.
Right, right. And you like sometimes you become even like a little more aware of something.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh yeah,
Yep.
that thing I told my character that she needed to work on, that might be something
Oops.
today.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny how life, I mean, I think what is that phrase like I'm going to murder the phrase, but like life resembles fiction or fiction resembles life or something like. And I think that's why fiction is in so many ways strikes a chord in people's hearts when they're reading because they're like this is actually not too far from the truth. This could really happen.
Yes.
Especially in your genres. I think your genre is one where it takes people deeper into that more introspective thought process of the internal struggle that goes on with characters as they're facing the external pressures of what's happening in their life. So, okay, so bees. Let's talk bees for a little bit more. I want to go back to bees. Are you one of those people that will look at a bee and then have spiritual correlations? Like my mom would look at eagles and she would be like, oh, the soaring of the wings and eagles is like, the scripture verse, and she got so many parallels between faith and an eagle. Do you do that with bees?
Yeah, a little bit. I know definitely when I'm working with bees, there's just a piece about it.
Okay.
But my big story, I would say, about bees in this book and the way that God used bees in my life,
Okay.
with this book is this. So the year that I wrote my bees that had overwintered died. Both of
Oh
my
no.
hives, they were gone. And so the year that I wrote my book with my beekeeper, my hives were empty. And I didn't replace them because we were supposed to travel. Those travel plans got canceled. And so I sat there looking out the window the entire time that I wrote this book with empty hives.
Oh.
And I struggle with this book for probably a lot of reasons. I think I challenged myself in some new ways, writing wise.
Mhm.
But I think I didn't really want to admit it at the time. But I think part of it was because I felt like a failure as a beekeeper. And I'm writing this
Oh,
book
okay.
about a beekeeper. Like I didn't want to admit that to myself at the time. And I didn't
Sure.
see that at the time. Um, but I tried to maybe lure some like homeless bees to my hive. It didn't work. So anyway, this story just like in my mind, it felt like a symphony. But
Mm.
I don't know if you've had this experience, but when my hands were on the keyboard, it was just like Mary had a little lamb on an out of tune piano. That's what
Oh, mhm.
writing felt like.
Yep.
Um, and so anyway, whole process was tough with this book. And then the next spring, the year that the book was coming out, I got bees again, and I had ordered the bees like a year in advance. And you never know when an advanced reader copy is going to come.
Right.
The exact same day that my bees arrived, my advanced reader copy of this book arrived.
You're kidding.
And I like was so emotional about it because it was like to me, it was like this message from God, like you
Mhm.
didn't need the bees to write this book.
Mm.
And I was with you when the hives were empty, and I am with you when the hives are full, like either
Oh.
way. And it was like just this trust, because writing the book was a huge trust because I struggle with it so much. As I was
Mhm.
writing and I'm putting these scenes down, I'm like, I don't know how this comes together. But it was like this step by step trust of him where I could
Mm.
just see the steps right in front of my feet.
Yeah.
And so like when you look, sometimes you look back on a
Mhm.
story and you see these themes that are written into the story that maybe you didn't really intend to write into the story,
Right.
but these themes of trust are in this book. And it just reflected the way that God was teaching me to trust in a different
Mhm.
facet in a different way. But yeah, those bees coming the day the book came, it was just like, It was
That's cool.
very sweet. It was just very, very sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is really a sweet moment. And it's one of those things too when you look at, I remember my dad when the hives and they'd harvest the honey and the honeycomb and everything. And it was just, when you use the word sweet, it means a whole lot more when you're thinking of it in terms of bees and the honey that they produce and all the health benefits and everything that comes from the honey and the healing. And so, yeah, an empty hive versus a live hive has so much depth to it when you think about what's
Yeah,
produced there and how that parallels our spiritual walk. That's cool. And then you get
it
your
was
arc
very fun.
on the day that you get your bees.
On the day. Like it was, I had just gotten the bees into their hive when the UPS truck came down my drive with the book. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. This
That
is
is
the
so
coolest thing
cool.
that ever happened.
That is so cool. So do you make your bees pose with your book now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you sit over here and you buzz over
Yeah.
here.
Like holding it up there.
Yeah,
Feel like
exactly.
this crazy lady with her book. I
I
don't know.
know. Yeah, yeah.
Mess around with us again.
What got you into bees as a hobby?
I've always been just really fascinated with them. But I have to go back to some point in my childhood reading, sorry, I can't talk.
You're fine.
Watching fried green tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, and it has
Hmm.
Idgy Threadgood and calls her the bee charmer, and just seeing her like I would never be reaching into some wild hive to get honey. I'll tell you right now, I'm kind of a chicken. I'm all the way suited up.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyway, something about that and just the concept of being able to charm bees
Hmm.
was just fascinating to me. So it's been one of those things that's always been kind of in the back of my mind for a while.
It's
And
interesting.
um, I got kind of sometimes I will go into a deep dive of researching some random thing, and it happened to be bees a few years back. And I just decided, I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get all
So
the equipment
cool.
and I'm going to get the bees and I'm going to be brave because it's a whole different thing, but to look at how to keep bees on the internet as
Hmm.
opposed to actually having
Oh, I'm
a,
sure.
a box full of bees that you've got to
Possible.
put into a hive.
I was gonna say, how do you even put out like, oh, the bees have arrived? What do you do with them? What do you do with them? Just let them out into the air, or is there like a science? I'm sure there's a science behind having them
And
adopt their home.
the queen bee is kept in a little, she's separate in a little queen cage. And so
Okay.
the hive, as they've traveled, they adjust to her smell and they know her smell. And so when you put that into the hive and there's candy in there, so it takes her a few days to eat the candy to get
Okay.
fully out into the hive. But as she's doing that, the bees begin to like work and make this their home while she's working her way out of that box.
That is phenomenal. That's just so phenomenal. Now I need to go study bees.
They're so fun.
They are.
They're so intricate and like everything about what they do, it amazes me.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'll mention too. I was doing the bad thing. I was sitting on TikTok doing let's scroll and get our dopamine fix for the day. But there was this guy on there and he has a channel where he's like a bee charmer. And he was talking about swarms and he showed himself there's this tree and this entire branch is weighted down because there were literally millions of bees hanging off this. And he goes up and he starts to cut down the branch because he's going to rehome these bees. He's wearing nothing but a flannel shirt and blue jeans, no gloves, nothing. I'm like, did he come away with a gazillion stings or did they just love him so much they trusted him implicitly? I don't know how that works. But
Swarms can be pretty gentle, but you would never see me doing that. No, never,
no,
ever, ever.
no, have to have at least 12 EpiPens in your pocket too, just in case.
Yeah, just in case.
Just in
Because I
case.
mean, even if you're not allergic, if
Right.
they decide they're not feeling gentle that day. I don't want to be there for that day.
Yeah, and they do kind of do things in societies, right? So if one of them decides that you're evil, they all decide that you're evil.
Right. Especially when you
uh,
start cutting down the branch they're on,
right.
I don't
That could be a
know.
problem. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It was interesting. It was probably the most enlightening 30 seconds of my day yesterday. All in
It really
preparation
did.
for this interview. So there we go. Oh, this is great. So, okay. So he should have told the bees is out. People can order it. For those listening, that you can go to Baker Publishing or bakerbookhouse.com, and you can get the book at 40% off if you use the code MADLIT. And that will get you it for 40% off and free shipping. If you don't have the code, you can still get it there. I think they still have it on sale for probably 30% off.
Yeah.
Which is great about Baker Bookhouse. I love Baker Bookhouse for that. So
They're the
cool.
best.
They're the best. So you're definitely going to want to rush out and get this. And then if you're not already following Amanda on social media and websites and newsletters and all that, what's the best way for them to find you?
Hey, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Amanda Cox Writes. And then my website is amandacoxwrites.com. And so you can sign up for a newsletter and get a free short story on there and see what all I've written and what's going on. All the new stuff is always up there.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, Amanda, this was a blast having you on and talking about bees and honey and mental health and all the great things that I know you're going to weave into your book. So that will be a treasure hive. See what I did there? A treasure hive of stories. But thanks for
Well,
being here.
thank you for letting me be nerd with you for a little bit, because, anyone who will listen to me nerd out about bees, I make them listen to me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, well, we didn't break into all the bee puns, but that's the buzz, y'all. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
Thank you again for having me.